Dazod 500 presents Canadian Elections of History. The 38th election in Canadian history happened on the 28th of June 2004. The Liberal Party leader actually changed since the last one. It was Jean Chrétien up until November of 2003 when he resigned due to fears that he'd be overtaken by, of course, his successor and at the time finance minister Paul Martin, who is now, of course, the Liberal leader. His main opposition will be the Conservative Party, who had a recent election for leadership, and they elected Stephen Harper to be their leader going into this election. The Bloc Québécois is going to stick with Gilles Duceppe. He's the only leader of any of the parties, the major parties at least, that was elected in the last millennium. And the New Democratic Party is sticking with the now famous Jack Layton, and he has been the leader since January of 2003. He's actually running from Toronto Danforth, and I live pretty close to there. So, while not getting any seats, I think it's fair to bring up the Green Party here, whose leader was Jim Harris, and they actually managed to field a candidate in all 308 seats in the House of Commons and won twice as many votes as they did in the previous election, which sounds nice but it doesn't really when you realize that they got 4.3% of the vote. So, the Liberals were on track to win a fourth huge majority in the House of Commons, but just a couple months later, they were polling at 10% nationally, and that's because of the sponsorship scandal, which actually was meant to be a counteractive kind of thing to the Parti Québécois, which wanted to, of course, promote Quebec Independence. This program ran from 1996 until 2004, which is, of course, the election we're covering, when broad corruption was discovered in its operations and it was discontinued. Illicit and even illegal activities within the administration of the program were revealed, involving misuse and misdirection of public funds intended for government advertising in Quebec. This actually hurt more in Ontario and Quebec, but eventually Paul Martin would gain support back in those areas. But gaining magic votes in the West, it was totally not happening for Paul Martin. But before you think the Conservatives won in a landslide, they were the only major party in Canada to support the Iraq War. And that is interesting to note, because unlike in America, where it seems like everyone loved the war, in Canada we were a little bit more skeptical with the invasion of Iraq. So the Conservatives supported it, and the rest of the major party candidates didn't really support it either. That said, the Conservatives were the slight favorites going into the election, but did that hold up? Well, the winner of this election got 135 seats, which is less than what Jean Chrétien won in 2000. They won 4,982,220 votes, which amounted to 36.73% of the popular vote. And no, it did not amount up because that was Paul Martin, who broke the trend of being dumped in right before the election and losing. He won this election against Stephen Harper, but it was rather close, at least with the votes wise. With the seats, there was a 36-seat difference, which I guess isn't too much. Having not won a majority of the seats in the election, Paul Martin was open to having a supply and confidence deal with Jack Layton and the NDP. And going into the election night, there was definitely going to be one of those agreements, but the Conservatives pulled an upset and won one of the seats in British Columbia, meaning that if you combined the Liberals and the NDP seat total, it would amount to one less than it was needed for a majority, and the one independent candidate refused to join the deal. So for 2 years, the election, the Canadian government was basically a dud. This election also had the lowest amount of voter turnout up to that point, with only 60.9%. And I'll see you guys winners for the election of 2006.